Okay, well, good morning, everyone. My name is Ana Paula de la Ocampos. I work for the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations in the Strategic Program for Rural Poverty Reduction here at Rome headquarters. And I want to thank you all for joining us today in this webinar on poverty reduction in the rural sector. What can countries learn from China experience? This is the first of the series, Rural Poverty Reduction, and Poverty Talks, organized under the International Poverty Research Center in China, IPRCC, and the International Policy Center for Inclusive Growth, IPC-IG, and the Food and Agriculture Organization. This webinar series, and Poverty Talks, has as main objective to learn more about what has worked during the MDGs, understanding the extent of the challenges we face for achieving the SDGs, and explore and discuss opportunities for innovation in rural poverty reduction that can help countries accelerate the achievement, particularly of SDG 1. If you would like to propose topics for this webinar series or suggest speakers, please contact us via socialprotection.org website. Today, so far, we have 26 attendees. We hope to have more people connecting as we move along. In fact, we have 500 people that have registered. So let's start. And please know that from now you can start asking questions from the GoToWebinar chat bar. So I will be taking your questions, and at the end of the presentations, I'm going to pass your questions to the speakers. And finally, I would just like to remind you that you can join www.socialprotection.org platform for more information on current trends in social protection and other topics related to poverty reduction efforts. Okay, so I'm going to present the speakers for today. The first presentation will be held by Dr. Weiping, who is the Deputy Director General at the International Poverty Reduction Center in China. Dr. Tan has more than 20 years of experience working in poverty reduction and development. He joined the State Council Leading Group for Poverty Reduction and Development of the People's Republic of China in 1994, after a successful career at the Ministry of Agriculture. In 2005, he became Deputy Director General of the Department of International Cooperation in the same leading group, and in 2010, Director General of the Department of Administration and Personnel of the LGOP. He then became Deputy Director General of IPRCC in 2013. Throughout his career, Dr. Tan has pursued a keen interest on development issues with particular focus on poverty reduction, rural development, and regional sustainable development. Dr. Tan holds a PhD in economics from the University of China at Renmin. Then our second speaker will be Dr. Kevin Chen, who joined IPRI in 2009 as China Program Leader and Senior Research Fellow based in Beijing, China. He's also Director of the Center for Agricultural and Rural Development, jointly established with the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Sciences and IPRI. He currently serves as co-editor of China Agricultural Economic Review. Dr. Chen has more than 17 years of experience in research and outreach in developing issues related to agriculture, production, markets, trade, environment, and policy. Finally, we will have our discussants in the webinar, Dr. Alain de Jambry, who is an agricultural economist working on international economic development with expertise in agriculture and rural development. Dr. de Jambry is a professor of agriculture and economics and public policy at the University of California, Berkeley. He was co-director of the World Bank's World Development Report 2008 on agriculture for development, and author with Elisabeth Sadoulet on development economics, theory and practice, published in 2016. He's a member of the French National Academy of Agriculture and a fellow of the American Agriculture Economic Association. So we will start now with our first presenter, Dr. Tan. If you could please start your presentation now.
Hello everyone. So yeah, so let's meet all via the internet to discuss issues about poverty alleviation and development both in China and in other countries. So now here I briefly the poverty reduction and development solution. Next slide. Next. 没了。Oh yeah. Okay. So, first of all, do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. I think it helps not having the video on.
Okay. So, first of all, I want to talk about China's poverty reduction achievements. So, yeah, in China, poor population has decreased significantly, and the problem of food and clothing for rural population has been basically solved. China established a minimum living standard system and improved the 5 guarantees support program to ensure basic living conditions for disabled rural residents. Then, the economy in poor-stricken areas has grown rapidly, and the people's living standard has been improved noticeably. From the 2001 and 2014, farmers' annual net income and per capita regional GDP of key counties receiving poverty alleviation support grew faster than the national average. So here the key counties means poor counties in China. So in 2013, around over 20% of national villages in key counties in poor countries has access to highways, electricity, telephone, and TV programs. China has made a substantial contribution to global poverty alleviation. Yeah. So from the 1981 to 2008, China's poor population fell from 835 million to 173 million. And China was the first country to achieve the MDG of reducing the poor population by half. China contributed 70% to global poverty alleviation. Next slide. Yes, so here you can see the 3 curves. They are the $2 standard, and then the $1.25 curve, and then the China national poverty line. So you can 3 curves, the trends of these 3 curves from the 1980s to now. I mean and this means the population. So you can see that it decreased sharply from the 1980s to now. So next slide. Yeah. So so you can see the rural poverty and yeah, the blue one is the poor population, and the red one is poverty incidence from the 1978 to 2015. So you can see the trend. Yeah. So next slide. Okay, so here is the China's progress towards the MDGs. So from the MDG Goal 1A from the 1990 to 2015, reduce the population with daily income less than $1.25 by half. So this goal already achieved, and Goal 1B achieve full productive employment and provide decent jobs for all, including women and young adults, mostly achieved. And also the Goal 1C from the 1990 to 2015 reduced the population living in hunger by half. This is already achieved. Okay, next slide. Just a few minutes. Okay. Okay, so then yeah, okay. So here is China's poverty reduction main experience. So we have 3 pillars. First of all is innovation in institutional design promotes economic growth. First of all is then the annual reform, and there is economic institutional reform, and then is a political institutional reform. From these 3 issues, first of all, I want to talk about the land using in China. Before the 1970s, the ownership of land usage didn't belong to farmers. This belonged to the county, which means collective ownership. So during that time, before the 1970s, farmers didn't have their own lands. So the works of county. So if you are very strong and very weak, you are working hard. I'm not as working hard as you, but our income or earned, I mean the money making well almost the same. That means the average income distribution. So during that time, the farmers did want to work hard because of this income system. So after the 1978, China launched the first reform policy, which is land using policy reform. So the central government we launched this new policy to give the land to the farmers. So after that time, so the farmers have their own land for their production. Yeah. So yeah, okay. So in 1980s, so we built this land system. So the which is the household land titling responsibility system was established, which means the farmers have their own land for their production and also for their money making. So every farmer was granted the right to work. This is the first one. Then the economic and social reform, farmer product prices were liberalized. Farmers were granted the rights to free trade, and also the market was liberalized. Farmers are allowed to live their own, to work in areas where they would screen a higher income. Also, the private sector, private enterprises was allowed and granted the right to free trade. This is the economic reason, and also we have political institutional reform, which is the political key for the country's management and development. we transfer the focus from the political movement to the economical movement. This is a big change. Okay, so this innovation in institutional design promotes economic growth. Two digital annual economic growth boosted results from the 1978 to 2009. The economy grew by 10% annually. So this is very powerful economic growth, and also the job creation. Over 2 million rural workers were transferred to non-agricultural sectors, which means these farmers, were transferred from the rural area mainly to the urban area for the usual for the non-agricultural sector jobs, and also the rural infrastructure was improved, and so I'll talk later. Yeah. So China fed 22% of world's population with 9% of the world's land and 6% of the world's water resources. This is a big progress. And so the food and clothing were ensured. From the I just want to mention here from the 1978 to 1985, in these 7 years, about years, central the financial the poor people, the policy. So the years, poor from 200 million million. It is a policy reforming policy power for the people's living standards. So next slide, please. Yes. Okay. So we have many other big progress is infrastructure development. So in China, the roads construction in poor areas. So we have in village cemetery roads, reconstructing of dangerous roads and bridges, rural highway network, and business terminals in villages and towns, and major waterway transportation facilities. So this is infrastructure. Also have some small infrastructures in the in poor villages, like the small ponds and the small reservoirs, and some water canals for their irrigation and for their agricultural production. And, yes, from the 1980s, we have this program series, employing workers from poor families, increasing the income of poor population, and the agricultural irrigation facilities, drinking water projects, arable land development program, grassland development program. So, and also from the 2001 to 2010, 55 billion yuan. This is a Chinese currency. Were invested during this period. So about $9 billion. So water, also the water conservation projects from these investments, and for example, some small, I just mentioned small reservoirs, pump station, canals, etc., and also rural power grid operation invested, and also the renovation of rural houses in hazardous conditions. Yes, next slide. Yes. So this is in China's and the experience and the measures. Mainly, we think we have this forecast. First of all, is the government guidelines and the grassroots participation. Central government and the local authorities initiate this poverty reduction movement. So, and you know, we the specific departments like ministry in China responsible for the poverty reduction and development. And the central government will set a budget for helping the poor and the poverty-stricken regions. This is government role for poverty reduction, and also the grassroots participation. In my opinion, that's also very important for the poverty reduction, and also we targeted development focus on regions. In China, we have 14 big regions, which means that these regions mainly are poor regions for China. So we totally focus on these regions, and then we launch now from this several years. We launch a new policy, which is the targeted poverty alleviation and development policy, focusing on villages and households, which means now we targeted directly to the villages and the households. And finally, in my opinion, I think that self-dependent, self-reliance, and the empowerment of the rural poor also very important. So this is also the very important part for the poverty reduction and the development. So next slide. Next. Okay. So this is I just show you the government's guidelines. The governmental policy delivery system in China, from the central to the local. You can say LGP. LGP means the leading group for poverty alleviation and development. Leading group, yeah, for poverty. So the top one is the central level, and then is the provincial level, and then is the city level, and then is the county level. Yeah, this is the left side, and the right side also we have the office working for this group. We also have the central level, provincial level, local level, and the county level. Also, we have village poverty alleviation team for poverty reduction countrywide the delivery in policy and the investment money using delivery system in China. So next slide. And also strengthening social mobilization to participate in poverty alleviation. First of all, it's targeted poverty alleviation by government agencies and coordination between the east and the western regions. I just want to mention a little bit about this model, and this is a coordination and cooperation between the east and the west regions. So in China, mainly the eastern region in China mainly is a developed area in China, and the western region mainly are still the developing area. So we set up this coordination model for their both development. The eastern area, eastern provinces help the western provinces and help them and to formulate the development plan, help the western region to formulate the development plan and dispatch some cadres, some official people to the western area to guideline the poverty reduction there, and then introduce some industry and some companies from the eastern area to the western region for their business, for the western development. And so eastern region in China mainly is rich of the money, capital, and human resources, technologies, and the western area. So I mean the natural resources. So the east and the western regions have this cooperation can nowadays the win-win cooperation. Yeah. So and also the intellectual cooperation. We have many cooperations with the international agencies like the UN system, World Bank, and the agencies. And also have some bilateral cooperations and exchanges with countries. So we can learn from some advanced ideas, theories, developing math for our China poverty reduction development. Also the participation of private enterprises. Private sector is very important nowadays in China for China's poverty alleviation development, and participation of also the social associations like many foundations in China. So okay, next. So time is okay. Yeah. Next. Okay. So time is okay. Okay. So now current challenges for China's poverty reduction. First of all, the task for poverty alleviation and development remains difficult. This is a main judgment. We will achieve the poverty reduction goal set by the UN Sustainable Development Agenda for 2030, 10 years in advance. So next. Okay. So now this is a new characteristics of poverty. So the left the left, you can see the distribution of the rural population. You can see the west, the east, and the middle. So you can see the population distribution in China. And on the right, you can see the distribution of the poor population. So mainly in the middle and the west of China. So next. Okay. So rural to urban migration contributes to an increase in members of the urban poor. So this is, and then as for left behind groups, the elderly, women, and the children stay in rural areas. The elderly and the women have heavier labor burdens. Children's education and nutrition may suffer a negative impact. Health-related poverty and disaster-related poverty are severe. So next. Okay. Finally, I want to talk about China's targeted poverty alleviation strategy. Okay. So first of all, is we have a main poverty alleviation task force of the 15th 5-year plan. So China will formulate this plan. We launch this plan for poverty alleviation and development. So by 2020, we will ensure food, clothing, compulsory education, basic medical care services, and housing as part of the government's targeted poverty alleviation program. So, yes. So next. Yeah. This is the China's targeted poverty alleviation strategy. Targeted poverty alleviation is a basic requirement of the CPC of the 18th CPC Congress, and okay. China's poor population is generally scattered but locally concentrated. Therefore, alleviation should transform from region-oriented to population-oriented. So next. And many content of poverty alleviation. 6 precise factors and precise targets, precondition and foundation, and then precise projects, arrangements, capital using, measures for each household, and card dispatch, and this is measures, and also precise results. This is a goals. So how things mean that we should directly target to the farmer household and poor household. Okay. Next. So main measures also have 5. Okay. Parts. So, okay, next. Okay, so targeted poverty alleviation means 4 innovations in poverty alleviation and development. And you can see these 4 innovations. First of all is from broad to targeted, and from scattered to focused, and from transfer to creation, and finally from economic indicator focused to result focused. Okay, next. Okay, this is the measures, and first of all, increasing fiscal input and enhancing financial services and enhancing land policies and strengthening social mobilization, and finally creating a favorable atmosphere. Okay, next. So this is our China's fifth plenary session of the 18th Central Committee of the Communist Party of China requires the following. And first of all, considering the final goal of developing a moderately prosperous society, the 13th five-year plan must focus on reducing vulnerabilities. Poverty alleviation of the rural poor population is a major vulnerability. Implementing poverty alleviation strategies, lifting the rural poor out of poverty is the toughest task in developing a moderately prosperous society. We must give full powers to our political and institutional advantages to win this poverty alleviation battle. Next. Okay, this all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tan, for your very comprehensive presentation on China's trajectory in reducing poverty. We're now going to pass to the next speaker, Dr. Chen.
Should I start now?
Start now, maybe without the video so that the connection is clear. It's better.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Anna Paula, for the invitation to make a presentation here. And it does feel a bit strange to speak to the laptop in front of me. And but the topic which I'm going to touch on is really talk about the rural poverty reduction in China. And some of the material which I'm going to present is rather similar to what Dr. Tang has been presenting so far. And I'm going to minimize that, but for some of the key message, I think certainly worth repeating. Next, please. China is the country, they actually only publish the official poverty number for the rural population. They do not have that for the whole country. So those two figures, as you see in the slides, on the left side is the rural population and the poverty, and on the right-hand side is the rural population and poverty in terms of percentage. The reason you have a three line there reflect the change of the national poverty line. And so you have line 1, line 2, and line 3. But one thing is very clear, as you can see, the decline is rather substantial, very rapid. And the red line, which really represents the national poverty line, which released in 2011, which valued at 2,300 yuan per year. And if we look at 2016, and for the national poverty line 3, at the moment, China has about a little bit over 40 million, close to 44 million rural poverty population, roughly close to 5% of the whole populations. Yeah. Next, please. This slide really shows you using alternative source of the data. And we compared quickly China and what the rest of the world look like in the poverty situation from 2010 to 2013. And we use a relatively newer measure or the standards, which is $1.9 per day for the extreme poverty. And for the middle income is $3.01 per day. So as you can see, if we use $1.9 per day, and if we look at China in 2013, they only reported 25 millions. So that has a lot to do with how the measure or the indicator has come up. But nevertheless, both slides 1 and slides 2 really showed us this tremendous decline in the poverty population in China, and much faster than the rest of the world. And also, in particular, from the, say, 91 to 2012, probably more than 70% of the population under the poverty reduction is coming from China. So that's how significant contribution the China has made to the international poverty reduction efforts. Next, please. This shows you a little bit other aspect of the China's achievements on the poverty reduction, impact on the child nutrition, and also the life expectancies. And particularly if you look at on the left-hand side, like percentage of stunting, percentage of the underweight of the children for the under the age of 5, they declined quite rapidly along with the poverty reductions. If you look at the life expectancy on the right-hand side of the figure, as you can see, the life expectancy has been increased quite a bit. And even in poverty during 1981, the life expectancy is on average is about 67 years old. Right now it's about 76 years old. So the increase is quite significant. Next, please. So with all those significant achievements, and people certainly will think China must do something right. So what China has been doing right? This is the big question in many people's mind. And it's also not very easy to figure that out. So when I listed those so-called success factors, as you can see, I put the question mark over there. And I think there are more research need to be done, but I certainly like to list some of the factors which I think probably play a very significant role to explain why China is so successful in reducing the poverty in the past 35 plus years. I divided those factors into 4 categories. And the number 1 category, and as Dr. Tang has been emphasized very much, is really very strong political commitments from China. And you can look at the very strong institution from top to the bottom, and you look at a tremendous increase in the public investment on the poverty reduction. And the second is certainly the very rapid economic growth. And a couple of things worth mentioning. Number 1 is certainly the increase in agricultural productivity. Number 2 is the very rapid expansion of labor-intensive manufacturing sector. Number 3 is that the philosophy in the early development, so-called let's get some, get rich first. And the third category is really the institutional innovation. And I like to emphasize probably 3 of them. I think is quite unique to China. And number 1 is the sequencing development policy and sequencing targeting on poverty reduction. And number 2 is the poverty reduction, so-called industrial development. And then number 3 is what I call the Pairwise aid policy. It's quite a unique practice in China. And the fourth thing, even though money-wise is not very important, but in terms of practice and best practice, I think play a very important role is the involving international corporations. Next, please. So let me go over quickly for some of those factors. And for the poverty governance, as I mentioned, the strong government commitment, and Dr. Chen showed similar graph already that's really emphasized how much the government of China has placed on the poverty reduction over the 30 years. And on the right-hand side, as you can see, this tremendous increase on the annual public investment on poverty alleviation. And those are only the number by central government. But in particular, as you can see, the majority increase is really coming from after the 2008. So the public investment probably does not explain very much the earlier part of poverty reduction, but it certainly does affect or explain the poverty reduction post 2008, for example. Okay. Next, please. So as I mentioned in further, the one thing particular I think is very important from the Chinese experience in poverty alleviation is really the role of agriculture played. And in the early majority of the poverty reduction which occurred really during the period around 1980 to 1985 or 1987. And probably 2/3 of the poverty population reduction is coming from that particular period. During this particular period, agriculture has been developed very fast because of a number of reasons like land or other institutional reform, particularly for the so-called rural household responsibility system has been adopted in rural area. That means the land has been equally distributed to the households. That's played a significant role. And the second I listed there is really agricultural research and development, green revolution, hybrid rice and maize. And the third is really the tremendously improved rural infrastructure, particularly like roads, so that connect the farmer better with markets, irrigation, electricity, and so on. And the fourth factor is really the government agricultural support. So the right-hand side really simply show you how the green output are played together with the population growth. So overall, as you can say, over the time from 1983 to 2013, and the green output has been grown very well. In most of the year, is above the population growth. Next, please. And this particular graph really show you how important the structural and the rural transformation, like a role of the manufacturing service sector has become more important, and agricultural productivity has increased tremendously, and this increase in commercialization of agriculture, and this is structural transformation and the rural transformation. So in the IFAD report in 2016, they compared that with several Asian countries. As you can see, I highlight in the red. Those are the two countries, China and Vietnam, which register very fast structural transformation along with the very fast rural transformation. When you register the very fast economic transformation and fast rural transformation, you also record very fast poverty reduction. So that tells us how important is the economic transformation and rural transformation has played in reduction of the poverty. Next, please. Another aspect which I mentioned earlier is how important this so-called policy sequencing and targeting on the poverty reduction in China. I don't think this particular table which I put on 100% precisely summarizes the stage and so on, but give you the rough stage of the economic transformation, major economic policy, major poverty policies which happened in China in the past 30 plus years. So the first stage, for example, from 1978 to 1985, during this period, really this very limited anti-poverty policy. But majority emphasis is really on the reform and emphasize on the agricultural production and diversifications. So agriculture open up a land redistribution is the major policy. And for the poverty policy, it's really that time started the so-called work relief program. And they targeted a certain limited area for the poverty reduction. But nevertheless, even without much major poverty policy at that time, because of the significant agricultural growth, the poverty population during that particular period of time in China was reduced tremendously, more than any period of time in the recent histories in China. So second stage and third stage, I would probably put them together from 1986 to 2010, and this more poverty reducing policy being introduced, particularly in year 2001, you see they released the National Poverty Reduction Guideline for the rural China. They started targeting the poverty village, for example. But in the second stage, they started targeting the region or county, for example. So as you can say, the targeting has been changing, okay, in sequence, really. It has a lot to do with the economic growth, with the economic transformation which is happening during that particular period. And one key characteristic of that particular period is really the industrialization. It's rural industrialization with the development of labor-intensive manufacturing, with the so-called at that time the township and the village level enterprise development, which play a big role in increasing the non-farm income. That's in this particular period has increased the farm's income tremendously. So now you move to stage 5, 2011 to now, and the major factor is really the urbanization. So you can see more and more emphasis is really on the integrated rural and urban and the sustainable development. They are pretty much more emphasized on the sustainability, for example. And much policy is try to reduce the rural-urban gap, introduce the social protection, and introduce the environmental protection program. And in terms of anti-poverty policy, they released the new National Poverty Reduction Guideline for 2011 to 2020. So as Dr. Tang alluded to that quite in detail already, it's called the precision poverty reduction strategy has been adopted in China. Next, please. That's another success factor which I want to emphasize is the poverty reduction through industrial development, which is relatively unique in the circumstance of China. It's largely emphasized on the local economic development through the development of natural resource-intensive, labor-intensive industry, and to promote the local economy, and agribusiness development through the inclusive food value chain development. That means value chain development, how to be more inclusive, to benefit the smallholder, to benefit the poor peoples. So there's a new way to linking the poor farmer with the new markets. And there's also, in particular, the variety forms of the PPP. For example, now land can be used to share in a certain business format. And even the government investment in the poverty can be somehow used as a joint stock partnership, and with a benefit to the poor people. So those kind of new innovative feature, I'm not in the position to say this is necessarily the good practice because they are just starting and they practice a number of years, but I think needed to be have more evaluation assessment done. But nevertheless, this is a very interesting practice that's been going on in China. I think that that's going to have long-lasting implication for not only for China but for the world as well. And the last thing which happened in China is the emerging e-commerce. And there's a lot of new, China is in the new internet era. And so there's a lot of new e-commerce business come up. So you see a lot of new way how the e-commerce can help the remote, the rural areas, help to address the rural poverty issues, for example. Next, please. Another interesting thing I'd like to touch a little bit is the so-called pairwise aid policy. And this is rather unique. And a couple of years ago when I did research with the Chen earthquake, I come up with this idea as pairwise aid policy as a research topic. But this is not an invention by me, but it's really invented by some of practitioners in China and some policymakers that time, and they basically match the certain province with the county in earthquake areas. But now you look at the poverty issue, they do the same thing. They link the East and the West. They make them to work together. For example, they will have Shanghai to help Yunnan province to reduce the poverty with a targeted financial support, with a targeted enterprise development, with a targeted human resource support. And they also have variety practice of pairwise aid policy. In government, they have so-called, really that's first the county secretary. That means some government official in Beijing, for example, could be assigned to be a vice secretary or governor for a poverty county, for example. So they can bring the knowledge, they can bring the connection to the poor areas, know-how. And also this officially registered poor household pairing. So they assign certain official to link it with a 2 or 3 or 4 poor household. And some government ministry will link specifically with the poverty areas like village, for example. So which allow them to do concerted efforts to help reduce the poverty. And some states, I should add, private-owned enterprise as well. They now have a specific policy to be encouraged to link with the poverty county, right? Like Hengda will have linked with one county in Shandong, for example, to develop certain agribusiness to reduce the poverty. Research institute, university does the same thing, the pairing. So for this kind of mechanism, no one has really looked at carefully. The mechanism, effects, whether that's work or not, nobody really knows. But it's out there. It's been practiced for so many years. So more research needs to be done, really. Next, please. So what is the challenge? I talked about success factors and so on, why China being so successful. And let me mention a number of those. And certainly number one is the poverty standards. As I alluded to earlier, either you use Chinese official number or you use World Bank number, they tell you quite a different story on the poverty. And so we need to be careful with those. As China progress and the concept of relative poverty, absolute poverty will come up. And now you look at a province like Zhejiang, they really have their own, they are no longer a poverty province anymore, but they still have poverty household, but they use their relative poverty standards. So many lessons can be generated of there as well. And then come down to the poverty measurement identification. I have another slide to show that. The increasing inequality is challenging. Urban poverty is a big issue because now people migrate to the city, then there's existing ongoing poverty in the city area. And as I mentioned earlier, China does not really collect or publish any data on the urban poverty. So they may need to start to do that soon. So when I talk the National Poverty Office 2 years ago when we did that review for the WFP and Ministry of Agriculture, I joked with them. I said, you should start looking at urban poverty, otherwise you will lose your job, right? Because rural poverty will be soon eliminated. So this is kind of issue we have to pay attention to. And this vulnerable group, as mentioned by Dr. Tang earlier, the migrants, elderly, children, women, need special attention. So how we deal with those kind of vulnerable group, it's certainly increasingly challenging. Another issue I have a little bit more slides on that is dynamics of poverty. So let me go a few more slides to show that. Next, please. So this is a study which I did together with the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Science and with support from the China National Poverty Office. We did a survey in 6 poverty counties and collected around close to 14 rural households. And we look at a different measure of the poverty. We use the multi-dimensional poverty index. We look at income, we look at expenditure, and we look at 2010 and 2012. So from the numbers, you can say, depends on which measure you use, you come up with a very different measure of the poverty, right? And if you look at the table, the below, and a different measure capture the different portion of the population or household and poverty. So that's very scary in the way, because that means when you use different measure, really
it's 17 hours.
you measure certain portion of the poverty, and they are not necessarily overlapping, right? So you can see the red line, 55% for 44% are not overlapping. So depends on your choice of measurements, you're going to miss out significant portion of the population who are under the poverty. So that's very significant, very serious issues. Next, please. Now, inequality. This is to show you, well, the top line is really the ratio of the urban and rural income ratios. So as you can see, it has been increasing for quite a bit number of years, but starting 2010, it's declined. So that's good news in the world. But if you look at the per capita urban income, per capita rural housing income, the gap is still enlarging, right? So this is quite alarming. So that means the economic growth really will do much less help to reduce the poverty down the road for China. So that's why the precision targeting, precision poverty reduction strategies become much more important now at household level. Right? Before you can do that at regional level, more wide level, but not anymore. You have to target it more at the household. Precisely one of the reasons because of the increase in inequality, or still very large inequality in China. Next, please. So this is another study we did on the poverty dynamics. So we collected what we call the village census data. That means we collect information for every household in a village. Because that's the way you can look at the dynamics of the poor household move in and move out, and to derive the implication for the targeting in the household. So from this particular figure, as you can see, we did 4 waves for 4 years. We are going to collect the new information by end of this year again. But if you look at starting in 2004, we have poor and non-poor, right? But if you go to the 2011, some of the non-poor become the poor again, right? So as you can see, people are coming and out, entry and exit from the poverty. So this is very alarming because it does cover almost 7 years. So we are very interested in looking what happened right now. So we're going to collect the new data by end of this year. So next slide, please. So this is what we call the whack-a-mole type of situation, right? And you using certain measure, like right now we put a very strong efforts to make sure one household get out of the poverty. But if you're not careful, they're going to going back to the poverty next year or next 2 years. That's very possible. And so we want the policymaker to pay attention to this type of issues. Because of time, I don't want to explain every single word on the slides. Next, please. So let me quickly summarize what are the key lessons for a developing country. So I'd like to mention a couple of them. One is certainly the strong and continual political commitment and effective governance from top to the village, and strong emphasis on the role of agriculture, right? For example, some of the African countries think they can develop or eliminate the poverty without developing agriculture, and that's probably not a lesson from China. And promoting market-oriented measure and rural transformation, particularly develop labor-intensive manufacturing is key policies for China. And then the innovative policy reduction measure, as I mentioned earlier, 3 of them, sequencing and experimenting on the poverty targeting and reduction, and the poverty reduction through inclusive industrial development, and the cross-regional learning and pairwise aid policy. Those are very interesting lessons, I think, for the other developing countries. Next, please. So with all those lessons, the rapid economic development and China's achievements on the poverty reduction, not surprisingly, international organizations has given China a lot of attention. They will say, okay, what kind of lesson China has can have implication for internationally. So in the recent G20 meeting and the Prime Minister from Germany mentioned, the world should learn from China's experience in poverty reduction. So the UNDP, World Bank, and FAO, WFP, my organization, we have been doing quite a bit on these issues. Next, please. And there are a number of key China-led initiatives, and the recent Belt and Road Summit, a forum, which started in 2013, which emphasized on infrastructure development and also the industrial reallocation. And in our research, we call that flying geese. As we can say, there are many labor-intensive textile manufacturers already moved to, say, Cambodia, for example, that will help with the reduce the poverty in that particular country. That is the South-South Cooperation and Development Fund. China committed to $3 billion. And agriculture and poverty reduction are two of the 10 key areas. And the South-South Cooperation Fund on Climate Change, again, is $3 billion US. And China also committed a $60 billion aid package to Africa. Again, agriculture and poverty reduction are the other two of the 10 key areas. And there are many other efforts like China, FAO, Trust Fund, and other type of trust funds. And there are a number of the platform, knowledge platform has been led by Chinese Institute and the IPRCC, and led by Dr. Tan, so he is one of the early pioneers specialized on the poverty knowledge sharing. And recently, and the IPRCC and Beijing University with the Justin Ling's group, together with the Africa Center for Economic Transformation, together with the 34 leading institutes around the world, we established a global research consortium on economic structural transformation. Okay? And there's another think tank association called SILPS, the BN International Think Tank Network, which is led by a Development Research Center of the State Council with 41 members and 13 partners worldwide. And IPRCC is part of this consortiums. Next, please. I promise this is the last slides. And so with those interests, with all those lessons that could be learned, there are some of the key issues, certainly. For example, with all those new monies, right? So we have to be very conscious how those new funds can be effectively utilized in supporting the SDGs through the better link between the China aid and the country's own initiative and the priority. I think that's going to be very important. And the second, certainly this lack of evidence-based research on China's success that has international implications. And there's a lot of good practice in China. They work in China, but not necessarily work internationally. So we need to generate the evidence, say what works, what does not work, and then we can more confidently talking about the transfer certain lessons. Lack of development theory that can effectively summarize the Chinese experience. And there's very few research on really to summarize the Chinese experience. And one of the very few efforts on that probably is Professor Justin Ling's so-called New Structure Economic series. And he has established a New Structure Economic Center at Beijing University. And has a lot of new ideas, largely emphasize the efficient market together with the effective government. So this is derived from the China experience. And another thing I want to mention is really the lack of effective communication between China and the rest of the world. And I think the international community or the other country or China has to find a way to communicate. That means we have to generate more international recognized research. Has to become a priority. So the people in China and the people in the other world or the country can really talk, so they can learn from each other. Thank you very much for your attention.
Wonderful presentation with very important reflections, particularly on what can we draw from China's experience in reducing poverty and the challenges ahead for better understanding China's experience and how it applies to how could it be applicable to other countries. I think, well, we've been receiving many questions already from the audience. So we're going to pass it now to Dr. de Janvry for some comments, and then we're going to try to address maybe 2 or 3 questions, but please don't worry. All your questions are going to be later on passed to the presenters, and we will reply to all the questions on through the socialprotection.org website. So, Alan, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. First, thank you for the opportunity of participating to this discussion. The 2 presentations that were prepared for this webinar are really excellent. They are very comprehensive presentations and summaries of not only what has been done, but also what is currently being done and where the current strategy of the Chinese government is going. So this is quite an excellent opportunity to learn from this fundamental experience. Let me start with 4 comments that apply to Dr. Tan's revised presentation that we just received. And they concern, in a sense, what can be learned from the Chinese experience for the rest of the world, and also where the experience could potentially be improved in terms of the major challenges that remain in addressing poverty, which, as has been mentioned, is increasingly difficult to do. It's easy to address mass poverty at the beginning, but then the more people remain in poverty, the harder they are to get out of poverty. And so this requires additional changes to the strategy which is being used. So my first comment in terms of lessons is really the importance of having a strategy, as China has had, a comprehensive strategy which is not only at the national level but also at the provincial, at the city, at the county, and at the end at the village level. The framework that I'm presenting that you see on the screen basically tells you that we need a comprehensive approach to attack poverty, and there are basically 4 circles that you see. The top one on the right is to say, well, we need to address the risk of falling into poverty for people who are above the poverty line, which is the horizontal line that you see. And there's always the risk, as Dr. Chen actually was mentioning, to be exposed to shocks that are going to drive people who are above the poverty line below the poverty line. And it's quite important to have strategies in place which are going to prevent this from happening. Then if we look at the next circle on the left, this is about income generation programs, basically creating opportunities for poor people to generate income, which is going to help them to move out of poverty. And this is certainly one of the dominant elements of the strategy that China has been proposing. The third is what I call social assistance programs, which are essentially transfer programs of different types. They can be cash transfers, they can be food transfers, they can be educational programs, they could be conditional cash transfers. And the idea is that via transfers, then people who benefit from those transfers can also get out of poverty. The one that is below in the same circle is risk coping by the poor, which is to say poor people can also be hurt by unexpected shocks which are going to drive them further down into poverty and in what we could call poverty traps. So an important set of programs here as well. And then finally, what are called twin track programs, which are both short-run transfers and longer-term income generation opportunities, which quite often are going to come under the form of so-called conditional cash transfers. But the cash transfer is an immediate relief from poverty, but it comes with conditionalities attached, which are essentially asset building, education and health, or constructing local infrastructure, which are going to create opportunities to generate income. So the short-run transfer is, in a sense, a smart subsidy in the sense that it is not being reproduced over time. It leads to the construction and the accumulation of assets, which in turn are going to help people generate income for themselves and move out of poverty. So the first lesson, I think, when we look at this is to say what we need are comprehensive strategies which are going to be adapted to provinces, to cities, to counties, and to villages. And for this, we need, in a sense, the capacity to coordinate. And I think the main to me, one of the main lessons to be derived from what China has done and what China is currently doing is precisely to coordinate what the state can do in terms of guidance, what the private sector and the market can do in terms of income generation, and what civil society and what can be achieved via social mobilization and empowerment. And all those together are part of a comprehensive strategy. So a main lesson, I think, for the rest of the world is that poverty is very difficult to attack. Poverty requires comprehensive approaches. Comprehensive approaches need to have strategies which are going to be developed. And this is something that China has been doing quite successfully. What the World Bank and other institutions have done in terms of strategy for poverty is to have the so-called PRSP, the Poverty Reduction Strategy papers, but those are really quite limited compared to the comprehensive strategies that we have seen being implemented by China. So there is, in a sense, an opportunity for a sort of second generation PRSP that could take advantage of learning from China to see what should go into those strategies and how to make them be potentially applicable at all levels, from the national all the way down to the village level. So that's my first lesson, and I think maybe this is in fact the main lesson that we could derive from the experience, the need for a strategy which is comprehensive. The second is the role of agriculture, but this is not only in terms of productivity gains and yield increases, so the so-called green revolution, if you want. What I think has been learned from the Chinese experience is the need for a much more comprehensive transformation of the rural areas in terms of farming systems that are going to be more diversified. The key, in a sense, to use agriculture for poverty reduction is to fill the labor calendars. One of the curses of agriculture is the high seasonality of employment opportunities, and then there are periods where labor remains idle, and this is where the productivity of labor falls as a consequence, and poverty is going to be present in the rural areas. So what's quite important is to smooth the labor calendars by having more diversified farming systems, and then to have what we call the rural transformation, which is to also bring in rural non-farm activities in the processing sectors, in forward and backward linkages with the agricultural sector. So what we have learned from China is that we need to have more than the green revolution. And a lot of, for example, the work on Africa has been to see we need a green revolution for Africa. Well, this is not enough. What we need is a transformation. We need that more diversified farming systems that fill the labor calendars, and we need a rural transformation. So this is a second important lesson. I think a third lesson is the importance of economic growth, which is to look beyond transfers and to think how to create labor-intensive employment opportunities in manufacturing. And here, of course, there are very big challenges, because what was basically industrialization that was export-led is increasingly going to be driven by effective demand on the domestic market, which has to be created. And this is where there's a great opportunity, in a sense, to reduce poverty as a strategy of effective demand creation, and to reorient the purpose of industrialization towards satisfying domestic demand, which is going to come out of local incomes, wage incomes, and those wage incomes can be incomes that are going to be generated by the poor. So this is a third really important lesson, to use economic growth as a way of incorporating, creating opportunities for poor people, low-skilled employment opportunities, which are going to be available to them. A fourth lesson is the importance of targeting. And the more we are left with fewer poor people, the more the interventions have to be targeted. And this is, I think, one of the really important lessons of the new strategy that China is proposing to follow, which is a targeted approach. I think what's important here is to recognize that there are different forms of targeting. Quite a bit of it can be self-targeting, like, for example, in offering employment opportunities, like, for example, offering the opportunity to participate to public work programs. There could also be community targeting, which is practiced in China, But here one has to be careful that there is not sort of elite capture at the level of the community, which is going to take advantage of the resources which are being put forward. And then my last point is the importance of vulnerability. The fact that when we look at poverty, many of the poor are people who fell into poverty as a consequence of being exposed to shocks. They can be weather shocks, they can be health shocks, and quite often those shocks, and a lot of the work that IPRI has done has been useful in that sense. A lot of the exposure to those shocks leads to irreversibilities in the sense that kids are taken out of school, farmers sell their assets, there is migration which is happening out of the region as a consequence of hardship. And it is, as a consequence, quite important to anticipate vulnerability to shocks and to propose programs that are going to be available for very quick response, so that not only is there reduction of the risk of decapitalization or taking the kids out of school or malnutrition, but also that farmers are going to anticipate that those forms of protection are available to them, and knowing that they are protected, knowing that if a bad shock happens, they are going to have ways of coping with those shocks, then they feel more secure, and by being more secure, they also are more attracted to invest more in agriculture, which is what we call ex-ante risk management. So those strategies of risk reduction are quite important. I want to come back, if you go back in the slides, one or two, go back one more. Two issues that Dr. Chen mentioned. One is the continuing political commitment. This, of course, is key, and it depends on the quality of leadership, and we cannot assume that leadership is actually going to be effectively committed to poverty reduction. This has to be earned, and it has to be earned via political pressure, via organized groups. And I was quite pleased to see that in the strategy which is now being put forward, those issues of empowerment and participation and civil society organizations are really put forward as an important way by which political commitment is actually achieved. So this is a major lesson, I think, for the rest of the world. And let me finish with the one which is after, which is the effective governance from top to villages for good policies and programs. And if we look at world poverty today, it's quite interesting to see that half of the poor are in either failed state countries or in countries that have failed to grow. And so they are located in environments where governance is very weak, and we need to define strategies for reaching those poor, which are going to be less reliant on the government and probably more on social funds or NGOs or the private sector, since we cannot count on the government intervention so explicitly. And then finally, we see that the other half of the world poor are now in middle-income countries, some of which are, of course, in China, and this is the residual poverty that we are talking about. And it's, of course, increasingly hard to get those individuals out of poverty, households and communities out of poverty. They are further from the poverty line. They tend to be quite entrenched into poverty. There's an interesting program here called Chile Solidario that Chile is implementing, which is a conditional cash transfer where people commit to a program to follow steps that they are going to implement to get out of poverty. And the conditionality is a payment which is paid if people make progress along the commitment that they have made to follow the program to get out of poverty. So this is part, in a sense, of the sort of getting to the harder leftovers of poverty in a targeted fashion. And there are sort of imaginative ways of using targeting and using conditionalities in order to help people out of poverty. So those are just a few observations. I think the two presentations were really excellent. There's a huge lesson that there are huge lessons that can be learned from what China has done, but what is now being put forward as a strategy of targeting is also quite interesting and is going to be very important for other countries, middle-income countries, which are looking for strategies as to how to address poverty. So thank you very much, and those are just a few comments I'd like to make.
Thank you very much, Jalan, for your words, and we are extremely grateful to you for being connected from California. I know it's quite early in California. So we thank you for your willingness in participating in this webinar. And also, of course, to our presenters. I second Alain's in what he says in terms of all the very insightful aspects of both presentations. We unfortunately have only 5 minutes, and I will just choose one question. But as I said earlier, we will address all the questions that you have raised through the socialprotection.org website. And it's a question for Dr. Chen in terms of inequality. It asks about rising inequality in China. The participant asks if China has a plan, a specific plan to address the increased inequality. So if you could, Dr. Chen, very briefly address this question, and then we will close the webinar.
Thank you very much for the question on the inequality. And inequality has been an issue in China for a number of years now, and this is certainly probably the one single most important challenge for China, those states. And inequality could take a different form for the East-West inequality, rural-urban inequality, and all even in the village, within the village, the inequality has been increasing quite a bit. So those challenges have been real, and so in China this has been very conscious measures has been taken, try to look at the different level of the policy, how to address that. For example, from taxation perspective, people are looking at how can we redistribute the national wealth and redesign the taxation system probably to help to address this particular issue. And the second measure I think has been adopted a lot is certainly is to adopt the anti-poverty policy as we've been discussed so far. So as you can see from the one of the present slides which I have, and there's tremendous increase on the public investment in the poverty reduction areas. That's certainly going to help to address this particular issue at some degree. And the third area they being invest a lot is looked very hardly is the social protection system. And so far, the social protection system in China has been very much at the best, let's say, fragmented. And people's access to the social protection has been very unequal. In a sense, inequality in accessing the social services, that's probably the one of the biggest inequality issue in China. So now China is looking the way, how can we integrate the urban rural social protection system, for example, address those issues. The social protection system address urban people and to the rural people, how can we integrate? So in some of the much way-off provinces like Guangdong, Zhejiang, they are starting already on the integration and the way to address those issues. But for the poor area or at the national scale, that's still very challenging. China is big, and money is still an issue, even though people feel China has a lot of money. But when it comes down to reinvent the social protection system, there's a lot of issues. They need a lot of resources to address that. And IPRCC actually right now is working on to look at the post-2020 poverty reduction strategy. And one key issue we look at is the social protection system for all. And particularly, as Dr. Jean-Pierre mentioned, we particularly look at the experience on the conditional cash transfer as an international lesson for China. Yeah, I hope I answered that particular question. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Chen. That was a great answer. Unfortunately, we have to close, but that's why we designed this to be continued as a webinar series. And don't forget that you can always contact us through socialprotection.org, also through the GPIC website. And please keep sending your suggestions for the upcoming webinars. We will take them into account. And on behalf of all three organizations, we thank you all for your participation today. And we hope that this webinar has been as interesting as it has been for our team here. Thank you, and bye-bye. See you soon.